Happy summer, everyone. It's finally Tuesday. You're listening to Author's Best Friend podcast. That sounded so Disney Channel just now. And you're listening to Author's Best Friend podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and I'm here today with my new bestie, SK Horton. SK, what are you drinking?
I am drinking limoncello because I live in Arizona and we have our own lemon tree. So we make our own limoncello. Although I'm also drinking water because a little limoncello is plenty. We'll go a long way.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. How yummy, summer refreshing. I just got back from Italy, so I'm also on a limoncello kick, but unfortunately don't have any. How do you make limoncello?
So you peel the rinds, and honestly, my husband makes it, but then it's in vodka and it steeps for a long time, and then you add simple syrup to it, and there you go.
Amazing. Oh, that sounds so yummy. Well, I'm having a peach white claw. This is
All right, that's fun too.
Not as fun, but it does the trick. Well, happy belated release day.
Thank you.
Your debut novel, The Concealed, came out on the 11th of June, and it already has almost 200 ratings on Goodreads, which is super exciting. And the readers seem super captivated by the story. Lots of great praise. How do you feel? How does it feel having it? It's only been out for a couple of days, so does it feel like a huge weight has been lifted? Are you still riding the high? Is it you getting a lot of bombarding comments and reviews, and where are you at right now?
Yeah, I mean, I am excited. I do definitely feel the weight starting to lift. Very tired. Really pretty exhausting. But it's been great. I mean, you just don't really know how it's going to go. You kind of have an idea, but yeah, my publisher's been advertising, and we've done lots of social media as well, and people seem really excited by it, and it's selling. Thank goodness. So I'm very happy that people are buying it. So yes, and people seem to enjoy it, and it's awesome. It's, I think that's every author's fear, especially as a debut, oh my gosh, no one's going to buy this book, right? But people are, so far so good.
Yeah, I think that that's not necessarily isolated to the first one either. I think there's always that little bit of fear each time. No, this is the book that no one will buy. This is the one nobody wants to read.
Thanks for that. I was just trying to no.
Just trying to help, adjust expectations.
You're totally right. I'm sure that's how I will feel.
But that's great. So, okay, so before I'd like to ask you a little bit more about how the release has been, but do you want to just give us a little overview of the plot?
Sure. So Cate is our protagonist, and she's just a normal girl who's going off to college. She gets a scholarship to go to England, so she's going to college there, really excited, and then things start happening there. It seems like people are stalking her. She almost gets kidnapped by a cab driver, and she meets these two guys that kind of take her under their wing, and anyway, so bad things continue to happen, and she finds out that she knew she's adopted, but she found out that she was hidden in America because she's prophesied to save these two kingdoms from the bad guys. And so she was hidden, and therefore the Concealed, that was her code name in the other world. And so then she ends up going through the portal to this other world with these guys. So, and then it's a whole nother land, and she has to adjust. And it's kind of like a YA Bridgerton type of feel, or Pride and Prejudice, because they are kind of behind the times. And so, so there's balls and, fun stuff like that. And she's got to navigate being a woman or a young woman in this world that dismisses women still, because it's kind of going back 150.
I see.
Essentially, they used to go back and forth. And so they're very similar. They came from our world originally, and found this land. So that's why there's a lot of similarities.
The people in the new place came from the Earth or wherever?
From Earth. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, when I had read that she was going to school in England and she's originally from Oregon, I thought it was interesting because I'm somewhat new to fantasy, but I feel like you don't often get like geographical references, like places that you could actually imagine. I feel like it's typically like they're on this planet, which is like a normal planet, and then they've go transport to this other planet, which is fanciful and whatever. But none of all of the places you kind of have to imagine. But you could very easily picture a young girl going to university in England. Like that's a place you're probably familiar with, or that you've been, or you've seen it in movies. So I thought that was really interesting to try to do something that has it's like a little bit more like modern. I imagine it's like set today when she's here, so they have like cell phones and all those kinds
Yes,
of things.
yes.
So what was that decision like to have something sort of grounded here in modern times, and then also have something that's a little bit more like antiquated, and a little bit more old school?
I think it just came from a mashup of things I love. Things I read, like old, sort of a little bit throwback fantasy. And then
Mm-hmm.
I also really love Regency romance. And I think it was just all those things mixed up in my head, and they all came together that way. And I sort of imagined what it would be like to go into this other world, and then what that would be like. And yeah, so it isn't completely made up. There's still a lot of things, but then there's magic there too. So there's
Mm-hmm.
definite differences. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so it's just fun. It's just I don't know, I guess it just came from my imagination. But I did like that a lot of it is grounded in history and in contemporary as well.
Is the magic system new? Is that something that you made up?
Well, it's pretty much elemental magic, so it's not
Mm-hmm.
completely new, but
Mm-hmm.
it's every person deals with it differently, sort of, and has
Mm-hmm.
different talents, I think. So, and
Mm-hmm.
in that way, it's new for the readers because they don't know who's going to have what type of magic or how it
I see.
work a little bit.
And is it like Cate needs to receive some type of like training, or is it just kind of something that comes natural to her and then she needs to work on sort of harnessing
Yeah,
abilities?
Kate needs training and she struggles mightily because, yeah, because everyone else, was born there and can feel this energy and magic. And because she had her first 18 years in Oregon as just a normal girl, she comes over with something they weren't really expecting, that she can't feel anything. And so it kind of put a wrench in their plans. They're like, oh, well, what are we going to do now? Anyway.
Like this girl that has never even seen sunlight.
A little bit. It's like, lots to learn for
Yeah. So have you always had like a pretty active imagination?
I did when I was a kid. I used to love to write. A friend of mine, we liked to write in class, sorry, but we would write these stories and we would pass them back and forth. And we really enjoyed doing that. But then I'm actually a physician, and that training sort of squelched all that imagination. Like there's so much studying and so much
Hmm.
time spent, so many hours that for a long time I didn't really hardly get a chance to read or anything except for books, medical books.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so when I finally kind of finished residency and started my real life practicing medicine, where I had a little bit more time, then I started reading again and things started opening up. And then eventually I just decided that I want to do something creative. And I was thinking, oh, art or something, but I don't have any artistic ability and I'm not very good at music. And I was listening to music. I'm like, wouldn't that be so cool to be a songwriter? And I realized, I took 12 years of piano lessons and I'm not good. So and then I thought, well, what do I love to do? And I love to read. And then I remembered writing. And so I just like, well, let me give it a try. So it completely started out as a hobby. And then partway through, I realized, I had a lot of science classes and not a lot of English classes. And so I joined like a local writers group. And that taught me a lot. One of the guys in the group is a professional editor. So yeah, so it was actually the start of this book to right now is almost 10 years. It's kind of crazy because it was really just like a
Wow.
hobby and then which turned serious and then kind of obsessive serious
Hmm.
into trying to get published and all that. So yeah, it was a long process for me, but a great process. And I've since written some other things, but yeah, this one has been a whole.
Wow. So, how many stories are there between when you started this 10 years ago to when you started The Concealed and you were like, okay, this is the one. This is the one that will be the one I try to get published?
The Concealed is the first story.
It's the first one you've ever written?
That was the first one I've ever written. Yes. Yeah. Like I said, I've
Wow.
written some since, but that was the first one I've ever written, which I know is super unusual to get traditionally published. Have a publisher pick you up for your first
Hmm.
book. But I mean, some of it I
Hmm.
spent a lot of time learning the craft and,
Hmm.
classes and, all kinds of stuff.
Hmm.
So to make myself a lot more confident in my writing. But yeah, interestingly enough, that this was it. I think I was just stubborn. I'm like, this book is
Hmm.
gonna make it.
Uh-huh. So you don't have some drawer somewhere that's filled with dead manuscripts. That's good.
Yeah, I don't. I don't. I have a 100% complete murder mystery, actually, a YA murder
Oh,
mystery uh,
I love
that
that.
I wrote. Along the way, like you try and get an agent and you query, you write this cover
Hmm.
letter and all these things, and I changed the beginning and edited and did all kinds of stuff. And about a year and a half into that process, because I'm so stubborn, I signed up to get advice from a big editor at a publishing company.
Hmm.
And I sent her my query letter and then my first 10 pages. And this was January, not this January, but last, so a year and a half-ish.
Hmm.
And she looked at it all and she was so nice. And she said, honestly, I wouldn't change anything. I love it. And I'm like, okay, great. And this is like a 10-minute phone call that I paid for. It wasn't that much money, but so,
Hmm.
and I'm like, okay. And she's like, but honestly, we all lost a ton of money on YA fantasy and no one wants it. And
Oh.
she's like, yeah, she's like, I'm not telling you to give up, but I'm telling you, you might want to write something else. And it was pretty interesting. And so then I was like, okay. And at the time, I had been writing book two of this series, and I was about 70% done. And everyone says, don't write the second book because if you don't sell the first one, then
Sure.
right.
Hmm.
But I was also stubborn and I'm like, oh, whatever,
Hmm.
I'll just keep writing because I didn't know. Maybe I'd self-publish. I didn't know what I was going to do. But whatever the
Hmm.
case, so then I set it aside and I started the murder mystery. And then about 6 months later, 6 months later, Fourth Wing became a thing. And
Hmm.
then there had started to be these murmurings of romantasy around that time. And I'm sure in the indie world it's been longer, and of course, Sarah J. Maas has been around, but it started to become a thing. And by this time, I've been like 2 years had passed, and I had, already queried and burned my bridges with people that knew that YA fantasy or YA fantasy romance wasn't selling previously, and so no one was picking it
Hmm.
up. But then, things turn around on a dime. I kept writing my murder mystery and I kept sort of like half-heartedly submitting. And eventually I submitted to the publisher I have now, Athon Books.
Hmm.
And my husband was like, why did you do that? I kind of did it on a whim. He's like, only because he doesn't like to see me when I get the rejections. It's a
Uh-huh.
long process. And he's like, just stop,
Hmm.
just focus on the other book. I'm like, I don't know. I have this book that's done, I'm just gonna sit it out.
Hmm.
And so they at the time had been totally focusing on sort of male focused hardcore fantasy and sci-fi and lit RPG. And I was like, I don't know if this is a good fit, but I knew someone who had been published from there. And I was like, oh, whatever. Like, it doesn't really matter. I just got a whim. And then 2 days later, they sent me a letter. They had the first 50 pages and the query letter, and they sent me an email, and they said that they loved it, and as long as it doesn't implode, quote, as long as it doesn't implode or turn into erotica, which is I thought was pretty funny, which spoiler, it does not.
What kind of things did you have in those 50 pages that made them
Nothing.
ask
I know.
that?
My book actually is completely clean. There's kissing only. But I think they had been getting a lot of submissions
Oh.
like that is what it was. Because I think it's fairly popular, right? Pretty spicy. So anyway, and they said I can't see a reason why we won't sign you, send the full manuscript. And so I I did. And actually it was the first time my husband and I were having like an overnight anniversary trip and leaving our kids at home. And I got that right at the
Oh,
same time, which is awesome. But also I had a hard time like talking about anything else, right?
wow. Screw the anniversary. Screw the long years of marriage. I'm getting my book published.
Exactly. He's like the best. And literally the next day in the hotel room, it was one day, and they sent me an offer letter and they wanted a 3-book deal.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, a little depressing
Wow.
from the anniversary, but pretty amazing.
Yeah, definitely an anniversary you won't forget.
No, it's for sure. Neither will my husband, probably, unfortunately. I have to make it up to him.
Yeah. So did you pitch them the 3 books?
Well, I did not. My query has always said that it's a standalone novel with series potential, is what you're kind of taught to say. And
Mm-hmm.
this book does have a finish. It completes. It does not end
Mm-hmm.
a cliffhanger. Despite what some reviewers seem to think, I've had reviewers say, I try not to actually read very many of my reviews, but I have seen
Mm-hmm.
them say it ends in a cliffhanger. I'm like, it does not. It does not. It is complete.
You missed something.
I know. I mean, that is complete. I mean, she still has stuff to do, of course, because there's 2 more books, but it is a full complete book. So yeah, so that's what I pitched it. And they actually did email me and say, so were you serious when you said that this was, and I said, yes. I mean, I had thought about finishing it in 2, but they wanted 3, and I said, okay.
What compelled you to submit the concealed to them and not the murder mystery?
They don't do murder mysteries, but I also have not started. I just have, well, when I said 100%, it's 99.9. I just have one more run through to do on it. Yeah, and then it's done. I had an editor look at it, and she just has a couple of notes, our final notes, and then I got the offer. So
Mm-hmm.
then I put
Amazing.
it aside because I can't do 4 books at the same time.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just kind of sitting there waiting, and we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, you said that you submitted, I think you said the first 10 pages to them and they were like, oh, this is great. I wouldn't change it. I feel like I mean, you know good writing very early on, but I feel like the most important part about those is like, like, how good is your twist? And so I feel like you'd be like, okay, I'll take the first 10 pages and then the last 10 pages. Like, I need to know how you wrap up the murder mystery before we decide, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I've never had anyone ask for that. Usually they just ask for the full manuscript, but
Mm.
of course I haven't tried to sell the murder mystery yet. We'll see what happens.
So I'm really curious about what that comment a couple years ago about how young adult fantasy wasn't selling and where the distinction is between the young and adult and the new adult. Because from my understanding, young adult covers like 12 to 18, which is a huge gap.
Yes.
Is Fourth Wing considered young adult?
In traditional publishing, there's no such thing as new adult. Yet, when you ask every indie author and every person, that there is something new, there is
Mm-hmm.
new adult, and even like on NetGalley, there's a new adult section. So yeah, for Fourth Wing is new adult, but it is that really close line there, and like I'm passionate about young adult because I do think that there's a really big gap for that age group. I have 13 and 15-year-old daughters. And especially my 13-year-old, she wants romance in her books. And she doesn't really want middle grade anymore. She wants young adult. Yet there's this really huge gap because the big publishers don't want to admit that there's something called new adult, that they are kind of inching young adult. I mean, plus there's a huge difference between a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old
Oh, for sure.
and what they want. And so there is this really wide range. And that is definitely something I'm coming up against because I wrote this book for adults that enjoy like throwback YA fantasy, the fantasy that you kind of think of, like Selection Series, Kara Cass, and Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games, and all those. No Spice. And it's not that it can't be successful, like Lauren Roberts' Powerless is super successful, and that's No Spice. But then there's a lot of pretty spicy books out there too. And so people don't know what to expect when they open a YA book. And so sometimes people say, well, this is too YA for me. And I'm like, well, okay, but it's labeled YA, so I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. But I mean, it's not that I don't have a ton of fans that have really, really enjoyed it, but it is a problem in the industry that they don't know how to market. So they don't know where things fall.
Yeah, that's really what I was wondering about because, I mean, you say that Fourth Wing is new adult. Like I would say that that book is way too old for a 12-year-old.
Yeah, my children have not read it.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think that there is this huge gap in and not only like the spice that's contained in the book, but also just like the nature of the relationships, like the types of romance books that I would read. I'm a Cancer, so I love to have the pain with the romance and but the struggles like, Colleen Hoover books where it's like your spouse is abusive or you lost a baby, like those types of really intense adult things that happen to people are so, and that's, not even related to anything intimate, is like so much more sophisticated than what a 12-year-old would read, and people in middle school or even like, junior high, that's even too advanced. So even just the dynamic of the relationship, you're just looking for like oh, I hope that he likes me, but he might like so and so, or it's just a little bit more immature than what somebody who's like preparing to go off to college might encounter. And so in writing The Concealed, even if in its conception, did you know that you were going to have to find this balance of like, I'm writing this as a throwback for adults, but also I'm writing this because I want people that like my children to be able to read this and connect with it and find it, engaging?
Yeah, that was something that honestly, because it was a 10-year process, that it didn't really occur to me until much later. And in some ways, I didn't even know until some reviews started coming back that way, like, hey, this is too YA. And not all of them, of course, right? And so it wasn't really on my radar. The adults that had read it enjoyed it. I had a lot of beta readers and I have a writing group, etc. No one had really, people said it has a nice teen voice, but no one had concerns about that. And I guess I didn't completely understand the market, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
where it was at. It's an interesting thing, or maybe in some ways I'm trying to buck the market because I don't always agree with the market. 'Cause I have to find books for my kids to read,
Mm-hmm.
and
Sure. Yeah.
right, and so I believe in my book, and I believe that a lot of adults like it, and I really want teens to like it. And it's not a preachy, it's like just total escapist, fun, flirty type of read. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely not junior high romance though.
Mm-hmm.
Novel,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
They're more, they're 18-year-olds, so they're not super advanced.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But but yeah, I mean, it is an interesting balance, one I didn't really expect.
Well, I think fantasy is also hard because, like, even thinking about like Hunger Games, which isn't really fantasy, but like Hunger Games or Divergent or even Harry Potter, like it's like life or death situations, which is like way more intense than your typical like middle schooler would encounter. So I think that even that element, you're like quote unquote reading a little bit above your grade level in that respect. Like, if you're like in middle school reading a Harry Potter about this like man demon thing that's like hunting this young boy, like that's kind of scary and that's kind of intense. And if like, I don't know, in movie form it'd probably be a little bit scary for somebody that young. But yeah, I think and this is just occurring to me like as we're talking, it's got to be really tricky for parents to find that good balance of books for their kids to read. I can't even really imagine. I guess like Tracy Back is coming out with a book in July, and it's not a fantasy, but it's a very sweet young adult book that I think that young teenagers could read. But I think that that's really hard for people to do, especially outside of fantasy, to write romance that middle schoolers could read. But even with fantasy, because it is not only the romance piece, but there's also like danger and scarier, more graphic type
Yeah,
themes.
there's blood, etc. Yes, true.
Yeah. Have your kids read your book?
Yes, my kids have totally read my book. Yes. Yeah. In
Oh my
fact,
gosh.
my younger daughter, she loves it so much. She's beta reading. She's beta reading my second book right now, actually. Yeah. Yeah, she
Wow.
really loves it. Yeah. So it's been fun. It's been fun.
That's got to be the hardest thing as a parent. Like your toughest critic is probably your
I
kids.
know. I know. There's been a few things like, Mom, I think maybe you should soften this or whatever.
Uh-huh.
I listen to her. Sometimes I don't. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely, sometimes I ask her, like, it's good feedback, right? But I mean, why not? She wants to read it. Let her tell me what she thinks.
Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
Does she tell her friends that her mom writes books?
Yes. In fact, did author visit at her school. I talked to 8 English classrooms.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, at her school and talked about the publishing process, etc. It was fun.
Oh my gosh, that's cool. I'm
Yeah.
sure you inspired some kids in there who have probably a desk drawer full of little manuscripts
Yeah,
full of little
yeah,
stories
some
they've
of them
written.
were. I know. And I never knew I wanted to be a writer. So like my first question was, raise your hand if you think you might be a writer, and usually there's like not very many. And then I'd
Mhm.
say, well, I'm like all of you who didn't raise your hand. I wanted to be a doctor. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but I think it's nice to show my kids or anyone really that you don't have to just be one thing, you can be a doctor and a writer or an artist or whatever it is. You don't have to define your whole life because no one is defined by one thing.
And I'm sure as an adult, that took you a little bit of time to actually be like, yeah, I could write a book. Like I have a full-time job. I'm a physician, but I could also do this thing that brings me a lot of joy and started out as a hobby. Like at least that's how I felt with editing. Like when a friend wrote a book and then I was reading it and giving feedback and then it stemmed into another book and then another book and then I was doing it for people that weren't her. It was kind of like I actually find a lot of joy in reading these stories and giving feedback and like it's weird to think that that's actually something that you could do, maybe not for a living, but for a big chunk of your time and people could pay you to do it and people pay to read your stories. Like I'm sure that was a little bit surreal at first.
Yeah, it is. It's still sometimes hard to believe. Except now I kind of have 2 full-time jobs. I worked really hard to finish up the second book to give to beta readers. I finished just a week and a half ago.
Oh, wow.
My husband took my kids to see the in-laws, and I had a 3-day weekend, and I was like 5:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. all day long. Like,
Wow.
gotta get it done because I did not want it hanging over my head during relief.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's awesome. It's good. I do need a break.
Hmm.
I'm
So what does that look like? What do your writing days look like? Like what's your setup and how do you stay motivated?
I have a really strange schedule because I work at a level 1 trauma center. And so you have to have
Oh, wow.
coverage all the time. And so sometimes I work evenings, sometimes I work really early in the morning. We have all kinds of weird shifts. And sometimes I work at night. And so I
Hmm.
essentially just write when I can. And that's how it works. Sometimes I'm sitting in the parking lot and when my kids are at swim practice or the library that's really close and I go right there. And I've just learned that flexibility is key and there's not like a perfect setup and time. Well, sometimes there is when your husband takes you to put it down. That's a perfect time.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just have to find the snatches of time when it works.
So if you're working a really long shift and you're in the nitty gritty working in the medical field, when you come home and sit down to write, is it just kind of like a pretty easy release? Like the ideas just kind of flow because you've kind of had that stifled all day while you're working, or do you still get a little bit of writer's block?
I definitely get writer's block. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it flows easy. And sometimes I just give myself permission that, hey, today was a long, hard day and I'm not going to write today. I mean, sometimes you just don't feel like it. And I give myself permission for that. But yeah, I found that writing in a notebook instead of a laptop helps when I have writer's block. I always regret it later because my handwriting is doctor's handwriting and it's horrible. And then you have to type it back in. And I'm like, what did I say? But it does really help me get the words out. So every time I do it, I'm like, this is the last time I'm doing this. And then I do it some more because it works.
Why do you think writing in a notebook is better than in a computer?
It gives you the permission to make mistakes, I think.
Mhm.
You flow, and I write with a pen, not a pencil. So sometimes I, of course, scribble things out, but yeah, so that I just keep going. And that's the other thing. Definitely a messier draft because
Mhm.
writing on a computer, you fix those spelling mistakes or you look up that thesaurus, like, oh, I need a better word here. And so
Mhm.
it does really slow down the flow. I prefer my drafts cleaner like that, though. So I'm happy when I do it that way. I mean, I'm probably about 50-50. I got to a point in book two where I just was kind of stuck. So I'm a little bit, I like to outline a little, but I'm kind of a pantser too, where I don't want to know everything that happens. Otherwise, I get a little bored. And so once I knew the ending and exactly what was going to happen, I was like, oh, I've got to write this out. I have to finish it. So that's when I struggle a little bit.
Interesting. So sometimes you kind of just let some of the plot line come to you as you're writing, like you're writing it and you're not quite sure what the ending will be.
I always know the ending. I always know
Hmm.
where I'm writing to, but the in between, sometimes, well, most of the time, yes. I don't know.
That's that's fun. So do you have those moments where you're like picking your kids up from swim or you're like in the hospital and it's just like, ah, that's what the scene's gonna be. That's where my next chapter's going. Or is it like when you're sitting down actually focusing on it?
Most of the time when I'm sitting down and focusing on it, I find the shower really helpful for whatever reason. My husband's like, get out. I'm like, wait, no.
I'm working.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm working. I think it's because I'm always we're just a very go human society. So there are no phones in the shower or like it's just a relaxing place to let your mind wander.
Yeah, the only time I let my phone come in the shower is when I'm reading a good book that I can't put down. And then I have a little window in the shower and I'll prop it up in there on the Kindle so that I can swipe because I
I
just
love
couldn't
that.
take my 15-minute shower.
I love that. I take my audiobooks in there, I guess. I do that.
That's a good one. I meant to ask you about that. I'm pretty positive I've never listened to an audiobook like myself. I've never like started a book. I'm very nostalgic that way with like picking up a physical book and reading. It actually took me a very long time to actually start getting into Kindle version. I think it was just because the weight in your suitcase of bringing physical books on airplanes is just, it's too heavy. So I had to switch to Kindle. But I saw your post for your audiobook, and I think you said Amanda Lee Cobb is narrating, and her voice is so captivating. I think I talked to Hannah Levin about this. You like listen to people's voices and then you pick one, or what was that process like for getting her to narrate your book?
Yeah, so essentially they asked me, was there anyone I was interested in? And it seemed like something I had to do very quickly. They needed a short time frame because they decided very quickly they wanted to get my book out before summer reading. And so it was a little bit of a rush. And I was like panicked. Well, I don't know. And then they were going to give me lists of people to listen to, but I started listening and I realized that I had heard Amanda Lee Cobb because my book is an American girl and literally everyone else has a British accent. I needed someone who could transition very easily. And I had heard her. She has a British accent in Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. She did those. She also did A Quarter Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. So that was pretty amazing. And then several other I had heard her do British accents. And so I was like, she seems way out of my league. And so I wrote the email and I was like, so I would really love, Amanda Lee Cobb. And I literally like erased it 3 times just because I'm like, yeah, this is never going to happen. But I sent it and it's just a lesson and hey, ask for it. And so they gave me a few other people and there was someone else. I was like, oh yeah, they sound like they'd be pretty good. And then so I had sort of been like, okay, I'll do that person. And then I got an email from my editor, and he was like, yeah, so Amanda Lee Cobb's in, so we're gonna go with her. So yeah, there was a little bit of screaming in the house because she's kind of like my dream editor. I mean, my dream narrator, and she is fantastic and going from British to American so seamlessly. I mean, she made me forget that she was a woman when she was doing my guy accents, my male characters. It almost sounds like it's two people.
That's great. Yeah, when I heard it, I thought it was at first between the British and the American. And so I was already planning on asking you about the decision between using multiple, but I was curious about the decision to have one narrator read both the male and female parts versus having, I know that people do have a male character come in and read. My husband listened to an audiobook. It was what are those books? James Reese, I think. He's like a Navy SEAL or something. Anyway, it's not important. It's narrated by a guy and he does the female parts and it's the funniest thing I've ever heard. I can't take it seriously. Like he would listen to it in the car. I'm like, it was like a hint of romance in there. And I was like, this is not, I've lost the plot entirely. I'm out of the book because it sounds so silly. But yeah, I think it's worse when the guy tries to do the girl because it just sounds mocking and not very endearing. And so is it always like the default is you just have one person read all of your characters, or do they give you an option to also have like a male narrator?
So I think it's kind of a newer thing to go back and forth with male and female. It's my understanding it's a lot harder to produce that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then you've got two people and you have to get their schedules together, etc.
Sure.
So it's less commonly done when you have a single point of view. Now, when you have multiple point of views, and so that you've got male and female, which spoiler, book 2 does, then frequently, and that's what I will probably do, there'll be a male person doing the male POV when there's separate chapters. And
Gotcha. Then it's just chapter by chapter. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Did you get to talk to Amanda at all after she read the book?
I didn't talk to her, but I kind of stalked her a little on Facebook. And then it turns out she was like kind of trying to find me too. Like we were kind of trying to find each other because she was like, I found you. So I wrote her a nice note and I was like, told her what a fantastic job she did. Because it took me a long time. I just got to listen to it like a week and a half before it launched. And I don't even have a full copy. I just have them like by chapters. It's kind of funny, downloaded by chapters. But I wrote a really nice note and then she posted it on Facebook, my note to her. So anyway, so yeah, it was very nice. So she knows I love her and she's been very kind and promoting my book and saying how fun it is. And she really enjoyed doing both accents. So
wow, that's surreal. That's awesome. Yeah, and I'm sure, that was probably a fun challenge for her to do the swapping back and forth. So that was probably a cool thing that she got to try out.
Yeah, I mean, I think she has before, I imagine, because she's done a lot of British characters, and I mean, I have heard her a little bit do it, but yes.
In one single book?
In one single book, yeah. But I do think, I imagine it was a little bit of a challenge. That was definitely a concern for me when I was getting someone. I was like, can they do it? I don't know. I had no concerns with her.
Yeah, that's awesome. This might be my first audiobook. I might have to give it a listen just for Amanda.
All right. Yes, do it.
And the other thing I wanted to ask about was your character art, because I'm obsessed with it. I love the greens. I love it. It's so cozy. Did you do that through Athon Publishing, or did you find somebody to do character art, or what did that look like?
So there's several of us because Athon is starting to do Romantasy. So there's, I don't know, 6 or 7 of us now, and we're on a little chat together. And so one of the other writers, she had found this person, and our editor, the owner, he liked it. And he was like, okay, everyone gets one, commission her. And so we did. And that's what it was. And I need to get more, actually. Because she's really good. I've already talked to her. I was like, yeah, I need to get more. She's fun. I really like how it turned out.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Did you send her like pictures of famous people that you had pictured, or like, did you send her an aesthetic, or how did that work?
Yeah, so actually the girl, Cate, is is my older daughter. It's like kind of not really, but yeah, I mean, I pictured her sort of when I wrote it, and that I sent her pictures of her, and that was like the way she did her hair with the little braids and for homecoming. And she had this green dress on, but the green dress is important to the story too. So I sent her pictures of dresses, I sent her pictures of my daughter, and then I sent her pictures of what I wanted Daniel to look like and what I wanted him to wear. And so yeah, she did a fantastic job.
Wow, that's amazing. So now your daughter has to be on the hunt for a Daniel because they look so aesthetically pleasing together.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. I showed my girls the picture and they both were like, "Ooh, he's hot." And I was like, "Yeah, exactly." Even though it's cartoon, right? Like, okay, perfect.
Oh my gosh, that's great. I'm sure that was good for your older daughter, I mean, she looks
Yes.
beautiful on that cover.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me and sharing your journey. This was so fun, and I appreciate you chatting with me a little bit about what it's been like to work with a publisher and finding your way in the market. And congratulations again on the release. It's super exciting.
Thank you.
So for listeners, if you haven't already, go check out The Concealed. It's on Amazon. You can also get it from Barnes & Noble. And for updates on what SK is up to, you can check out her website and subscribe to her newsletter. Thanks again, SK, so much. It was so nice chatting with you. I look forward to devouring your book, maybe orally. Maybe I'll listen to it.
Sounds good.
We'll see you next time.